This man has just been executed for a string of horrific crimes that started with violent acts in his youth and culminated in a deadly drive-by shooting that claimed 2 innocent lives. His name was Kendrick Antonio Simpson, and he was put to death by lethal injection at Oklahoma State Penitentiary after nearly 2 decades on death row. In this video, we'll dive into his final words, his last meal request, and the brutal acts that sealed his fate in the execution chamber. Kendrick Antonio Simpson was born around 1981 in New Orleans, Louisiana, specifically in the violent Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood. Little is publicly documented about his early childhood, but records indicate he grew up in a chaotic family environment in a housing project plagued by prostitution, drugs, and murders, including his mother, who was just 16 when he gave birth to him and later became addicted to crack cocaine, while his father abandoned him at birth. His earliest memories included witnessing dead bodies, shootings, stabbings, and other acts of extreme violence in the projects. He also had a traumatic experience of being sexually abused by a family member from age 11 until he was 16. Simpson's life took a tragic and violent turn during his teenage years, marking the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior that spanned decades. At 16, he fathered 2 sons and committed his first major crime, a home invasion robbery in New Orleans where he beat and shot electronics repair business owner Hung Pham in the face, leaving him severely injured. Despite his youth, he was tried as an adult, convicted of armed robbery in 1997, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. As a young offender in adult-like facilities, Simpson endured severe trauma during his incarceration, including the harsh realities of prison life that compounded his existing psychological issues. These experiences occurred during his critical adolescent years, contributing to long-term emotional and mental health issues, including a later diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from chronic childhood trauma, abuse, and violence. Despite the sentence, Simpson was released after serving his 6 years, in 2003, but his freedom was short-lived before more violence struck. In November 2004, while walking to a store in New Orleans, Simpson was the victim of a drive-by shooting, sustaining 5 bullet wounds to his leg, chest, abdomen, and skull. He underwent 16 surgeries and temporarily used a colostomy bag during recovery. This incident, combined with his childhood traumas, contributed to a diagnosis of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, leaving him hypervigilant, paranoid, and in a fragile mental state. While still recovering from these injuries, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in August 2005, forcing Simpson to evacuate as a refugee to Oklahoma City, where he relocated and attempted to start over, but his PTSD and unresolved trauma persisted. Kendrick Simpson, then in his mid-20s, had been in Oklahoma City for only a few months before striking again with deadly force. On January 15, 2006, Simpson loaded an assault rifle, which he referred to as his chopper, into the trunk of a friend's car before heading out for the night. He and his friends first attended a house party where they consumed alcohol and marijuana before heading to Fritzy's hip-hop club in Oklahoma City. Inside the club, Simpson passed by 3 men best friends Glen Palmer, 20, Anthony Jones, 19, and London Johnson, who made a casual comment about his Chicago Cubs baseball cap. Simpson took offense and stewed over it, later returning to confront them and threatening to chop them up, a slang reference to shooting them with his rifle. He walked away briefly but came back again, extending his hand to Palmer in a gesture of peace, saying, "We cool," at which point Palmer punched Simpson in the mouth, knocking him to the floor. Humiliated, Simpson and his friends left the club and stopped at a 7-Eleven gas station at Northwest 23rd Street and Portland Avenue. Coincidentally, Palmer, Jones, and Johnson arrived at the same gas station in Palmer's car. Simpson, believing the men had followed him with intent to kill, directed one friend to follow the victim's car and the other to retrieve his gun from the trunk. They tailed the victims for over 3 miles, eventually pulling alongside on Pennsylvania Avenue. As Simpson's car pulled alongside Palmer's, he immediately opened fire, spraying approximately 20 to 25 rounds into the vehicle. Palmer was hit in the chest, shoulder, and back. He remained conscious briefly, speaking to Johnson and expressing fear that the shooters would return, before succumbing to blood loss. Jones was struck in the head and torso, dying nearly immediately and remaining unconscious. Johnson, in the back seat, survived by crouching down and hiding during the barrage. After the shooting, Simpson boasted, "I'm a monster. I just shot the car up. They shouldn't play with me like that." The group drove to Midwest City, disposed of the rifle, which was never recovered, switched cars, and met up with some women. The motive was rooted in retaliation from the club altercation, escalated by Simpson's perceived fear for his life and his unresolved trauma, leading him to hunt down and execute the unarmed men in a ruthless drive-by shooting. Simpson was arrested shortly after the incident. His accomplices, Dalton and Robertson, were initially charged with the murders but pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact in exchange for 20-year prison terms. They testified against him at the trial, which took place in 2007 in an Oklahoma County courtroom in Oklahoma. Key evidence included their corroborated testimonies, Johnson's survivor account of the altercation and shooting, witnesses from the club and gas station, crime scene photos, victim wound documentation, ballistic evidence from the approximately 24 rounds fired, and a firearms demonstration to illustrate the semi-automatic rifle's function, since the weapon wasn't found. Simpson admitted to being at the club and in the fight but denied the shooting. However, letters he wrote to a jailmate contained admissions, and Collins testified to Simpson's confessions and lack of remorse. The jury also heard about Simpson's prior criminal history, including the 1990s home invasion and shooting in New Orleans, to establish his pattern of violence and dangerousness. On the defense side, his attorneys attempted to present mitigating factors like his traumatic upbringing, but they were criticized later for not fully exploring his PTSD and mental health issues. Simpson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 10 years for firearm possession. Simpson was 26 at the time of sentencing. Kendrick Simpson languished on death row for nearly 20 years, with his lawyers launching numerous appeals to reverse the verdict, challenging the effectiveness of his trial counsel for failing to adequately present evidence of his severe childhood trauma, abuse, unstable household with addiction and violence, PTSD from being shot in 2004 and Hurricane Katrina displacement, and brain development impacts from his juvenile experiences. They also argued that the crime did not qualify as the worst of the worst, warranting death. Instead, they requested life without parole, noting he would die in prison anyway. On January 14, 2026, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board held a clemency hearing. Simpson spoke, apologizing to the victims' families and Johnson.
"I'm not the worst of the worst. I'm not a monster.
I'm ashamed of my actions. I'm ashamed of the destruction my actions caused. I'm ashamed of being a murderer. I've dedicated myself to nonviolence while traveling the road of redemption. I'm not the worst of the worst. I'm not a monster. I don't make any excuses. I don't blame others, and they didn't deserve what happened to them.
I was young and traumatized, ignorant to what was important in life, and compelled by paranoia."
He attributed his actions to being young and traumatized, ignorant to what was important in life, and compelled by paranoia. His attorneys highlighted his rehabilitation, obtaining his GED, becoming a devoted father to his 2 sons, and publishing poetry in the Rose State Literary Journal, including pieces criticizing the death penalty as state-sanctioned hypocrisy. Prosecutors opposed, calling Simpson a ruthless and violent killer who hunted victims, boasted, and showed no remorse, noting he smirked in court. The victims' families and survivor Johnson testified against clemency. Talisha Jones, Anthony's sister, said, "When Kendrick Simpson took my brother's life, he took all our lives. But every one of his appeals was shot down, including a final one by the U.S. Supreme Court on February 11, 2026, which rejected it without comment. Finally, on February 12, 2026, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt allowed the execution to proceed without granting a reprieve, making it the state's first execution of the year, following a record number in previous years. Simpson, aged 45, requested a classic fast food feast as his final meal: a bacon cheeseburger, large onion rings, and a strawberry milkshake. He woke early that morning but declined additional details on routine. He met with his spiritual advisor, Reverend Don Heath, but no other visitors are noted. The execution proceeded on February 12, 2026, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary via a 3-drug lethal injection protocol. At around 10:07 a.m., Reverend Don Heath began reading scripture from the Bible in the chamber. Simpson entered the chamber, was strapped to the gurney, and before the drugs were administered, the warden asked if he had any last words. Simpson looked up, smiled, gave a thumbs up to his supporters, and said, "I love y'all. Thank y'all for being here to support me. That's it," with no mention of the victims. The drugs began flowing shortly after. Simpson snored at 10:12 a.m., showed minimal physical reaction with 2 tears falling from his left eye over teardrop tattoos, and a doctor declared him unconscious about 5 minutes in. A medic was summoned about 8 to 12 minutes in to check vital signs, and Simpson was pronounced dead at 10:19 a.m. Central Time. No complications were reported, and the process was described as routine by state officials. The witnesses are Simpson's family members, the victims' relatives, including Glen Palmer's sister Crystal Allison, witnessed and expressed disappointment over no final apology, noting his smile reminded them of the one that tormented them for 20 years.
I'm still just hurt and tormented by this. I was tormented again today. Even on his deathbed, he still smiled. So there's no remorse about this. So I feel good about the situation. I thank y'all for y'all's decision.
But they felt justice was definitely served for Palmer and Jones, whose young lives were taken tragically and far too soon. For them, that day marked the end of a wait that had lasted nearly 2 decades. They also thanked the state of Oklahoma for bringing closure to their families. This was Oklahoma's 130th execution since resuming in 1990. This wraps up the chilling tale of Kendrick Antonio Simpson, executed for murdering Glen Palmer and Anthony Jones. What are your thoughts on this case? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more videos like this. If you're a lover of creepy true crime stories, true crime documentaries, horror crime, unsolved mysteries, and the rest, you can do well to check out our twin channel Mysterious Dark Files for more videos like that.